Hey, everybody, this is Chris
and Kathy
from PetAbility Podcast. We wanted to take a minute to thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate every listener and are grateful for this platform.
Please help us share our vision by subscribing to PetAbility Podcast through your favorite streaming app. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at PetAbility Podcast and share our content on social media.
You can also support the show by making a donation. Simply go to our website at petabilitypodcast.buzzsprout.com and click on the heart symbol at the top of the page. Thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to PetAbility. I'm your host, Kathy Simons.
And I'm your host, Chris Cranston. Our podcast provides interviews and information to help your pets live their best lives.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Kathy. How are you?
I feel good, Chris. I feel good. I'm feeling pretty good today. It's a nice, crisp winter day here, and I'm feeling good.
Indeed. I'm looking forward to a walk with the pups a bit later this afternoon. So
yeah. I think it's sweater weather. Like I got to put a coat. I'm going to put a coat on Mac today. He's going to have a coat.
Yeah, totally. Well, today's topic is passive range of motion for the front limb.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that might sound a little dry, it is so important, people. How do we do PROM, or passive range of motion?
It is really important, Chris. And it's a range of motion itself is just, it's a factor in movement, right? So if you think about it, all of our joints have to move through a range of motion, right? Mm-hmm. And if you didn't have, or you were lacking in range of motion, it would make daily activity or daily tasks really difficult, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Or impossible. So
yeah, or maybe impossible.
Yeah. Having ideal range of motion, a maximum range of motion is paramount to optimizing function.
Right.
And one of the things I was struck by very early on in my career was the fact that as a physical therapist, we were taught range of motion very early on in our education. And when I started working with various veterinarians, they would be like, do range of motion, whatever, and teach the techs to do range of motion. Mm-hmm. And I remember actually talking to a surgeon about it. And I said, well, I think the techs already know how to do range of motion. And she said, no, they don't. That a lot
not necessarily.
of them,
not necessarily.
It's not necessarily a big part of the education, but there are assumptions made, that various professionals all know how to do range of motion, and in turn, that pet owners know how to do range of motion.
Right.
And it's not difficult, but there are certainly principles that we need to abide by to get the most out of it.
Right. And the forelimb, we're going to talk about the front limb today, and we're going to talk about the back limb another day. But I think it was great to pick the forelimb because we talked about this before about the weight bearing load of a dog and how 60% is on the front and 40 is on the back. So, although all limbs are important, and you should have as much good range of motion in all of the limbs that you have. Right.
Yes.
Even if you only have 3 limbs,
and your trunk and spine,
and your trunk.
Yeah.
But I think it was good to start with the forelimb so we can talk a little bit about how we can get that range of motion or passive range of motion of the front limb.
I agree, and we wanted to kind of parcel it out, right? Not be too much information where it can become intimidating or daunting. So we're going to focus, as you said, on the front limb today, forelimb, thoracic limb. Those are all pertaining to the animal's front legs. Yeah. And so I guess the first question we need to answer is, what is passive range of motion, right?
Right.
So, the term gets thrown around, but, really what is the definition? And basically it's, if someone, you, me, a pet owner, takes a limb, a body part, and physically moves or stretches that body part for another being. And that being, the dog, cat, or other, is not actively participating in that motion or exercise. So that's where the passive part comes in. And you're taking the joint through its natural motion. You're not twisting, torquing, doing anything crazy, because I know sometimes pet owners are afraid that they're going to hurt their pet. But it's just through their natural motion of typically bending and straightening a joint gently, slowly, methodically, rhythmically, for a total of 10 to 15 repetitions. And that's
so
in a nutshell.
It's funny too, because that we were talking about how your pet isn't actively participating in it, which is funny because it goes against which almost everything else we do in rehab, where we try to get your pet to participate in whatever we're doing. And there may be several reasons why we're having you do passive range of motion versus active range of motion. And maybe we could talk a little bit about the difference between the passive and the active, Chris, just to kind of let people know, so when they're participating in taking their joints to their range of motion, we're actually doing exercises, having them step over something or having them climb up on something or go around something to get that range of motion, actively participating and getting active muscle contraction while they're moving.
Right. And with active range of motion, you get more bang for your buck, right? So
right.
Like you said, you're engaging the muscles, teaching the body's connection between the nervous system and the muscle firing, so call that neuromuscular education. And I think that if that is possible, that is ideal because of those reasons. One of the big leaps, again, for me as a physical therapist, was typically when we would have a person do active range of motion, we would say, Kathy, can you raise your arm up over your head? Well, we can't necessarily do that with our pets. They have no clue. So we have to trick them, if you will, through these, exercises or activities, as you mentioned, to get the desired movement. And that's where the creativity comes in and it becomes fun and so forth. So, but as you said, there is a place for passive range of motion as well.
Right. And I think that one of the times I use it most, or two times I think that I use passive range of motion most, is during massage, particularly with my senior patients. I like to move their joints for them right through their range of motion. Gives me a sense also of how much range of motion do they have, when I'm doing that.
Is there a limitation?
Do they have any limitations? And post-surgery, because the animal may not be able to bear weight yet, on their limb. Maybe they had surgery and they're not supposed to put, a lot of weight on that limb yet. And then I'll take it through their range of motion. I don't want them to lose any range of motion because, as we talked about, it's so imperative. If you think about yourself, when you're going up a flight of stairs, you have to bend your knee, right, to get up that flight of stairs. But what if you couldn't bend that knee? What if you couldn't bend it and then it's straight? It would make doing stairs, very difficult at the least.
And potentially dangerous. And you have to figure out how to do it, and you use or substitute other parts of your body. So if you have like this peg leg and you're, leading with one leg up the stairs, the leg that can bend all the time, what is that doing to your back and other parts, of your body? So really, really important. I think also that, given a choice, or I don't even know if it's a choice, but through natural activity, oftentimes the range of motion isn't, I don't want to say maximum. So when we function, we're typically operating, and so are our pets, in kind of that mid range of motion. So getting to the ends, either end of that range of motion, fully bending, fully straightening, is not necessarily accomplished through exercise or activity.
From activity, right?
Right. So, we can ensure that we are bringing the joint through that full range passively. And there's another category in the human realm that we can employ in the pet realm as well, and that's called active assistive range of motion. So I'm sure that, Kathy, you've experienced when maybe you're trying to get a dog to open up its leg and extend the hip, so bringing that back leg for example, near, back towards its tail. And, you give a little like belly scritch, a little tummy tickle, and the dog will naturally kind of open up that leg if they love belly rubs. Yeah. And then you just push it a little bit more to achieve more motion. So they start the motion actively, but then you assist to maximize that full range of motion, whatever they may have. And so that's active assistive. So I hope that's clear to our audience.
Well, yes. And I think it is, because I think we've all done that where we've been scratching our dog's belly and then they extend their back leg out and they go kind of into a stretch. And then the owner always follows that with, are you having a good stretchy? Because that's what you should
in an English accent.
Yes, in an English accent. Are you having a good stretchy? It's important to make sure that you acknowledge the stretching. But I think we've all experienced that, right? That where you're maybe just scratching your dog and then they stretch their leg out because they're comfortable too. They're comfortable and they're getting belly scratches, and they feel that they can just sort of stretch that leg out. So
and again, take advantage of that, right?
Take advantage of it. Exactly. It's an exercise. You've done. Now you've just done it. You've done exercise. So,
absolutely.
So why don't we talk about some of the benefits before we get into the mechanics, I think, and just talk about how doing passive range of motion improves joint motion.
Yep. Yeah. So many benefits that maybe aren't recognized until we point them out. So, so we've talked about, again, maximizing the range that joint goes through. So most of the time it is a bending and straightening, but there are other secondary motions that occur as well. So if there is a restriction or limitation, we want to try to coax that joint back into full range, or at least as much as we can get. And that's one of the things that we do as rehabbers, right? So we use a tool called a Goniometer to measure baseline angles of the joint. And then through time, by doing such things as active and passive range of motion, we continue to measure and assess and see if we're making gains. And in my experience, oftentimes it's not too much and work and you've made gains, but then there may be a plateau. It may not be normal range of motion per textbook normals, research normals. Every breed and species may have a slightly different normal for their range, but it's that dog's normal, and may be restricted by arthritis or fibrosis or which is
an injury.
Scar tissue injury that you're not going to gain anymore, but you at least want to maintain what they have, what that maximum that they can achieve is.
I think I agree with you, Chris. I think you're going to find that maybe even in the same breed, depending on what that dog's life has looked like. So if you have two labs and their range of motion in their wrist it might vary, right? But it's important to maintain what we have because of the function. It's key to function. And one of the great benefits to doing the passive range of motion is it facilitates the health of the cartilage of the dog's joints, right? So and that's really important. Do you want to explain a little bit, Chris, about why that's important?
Well, right. And, let's remind our listeners that cartilage is at the end of both bones, like the long bones. It's called hyaline cartilage. And one of the unique and not so great properties of this cartilage is it doesn't have a natural blood supply. So it relies on its health by compressing and distracting. So I always describe to people, it's kind of like a sponge, right? So when you weight bear, for example, the fluids are pressed out of that cartilage. And then, you take that next step, the leg is in the swing phase and that sponge goes and kind of sucks up those nutrients and fluids and things to keep it healthy. So
very efficient. Yeah, very efficient.
So the cartilage really relies on compression and distraction. That's one of the things that I really remind owners is the benefit of taking that joint through its full range so that all surfaces get milked. All surfaces have compression and distraction. So we have the health of the joint itself, of the cartilage, the bones, et cetera, but we also have the health of this, what we call soft tissues around that moving part. So ligaments, joint capsule, tendons, muscles, and those are, shortened and lengthened as that joint goes through that passive or active range of motion. As far as like diminishing swelling, when you move a joint back and forth, if there's stagnation there and there's swelling that's either obvious or oftentimes less obvious around maybe an injury, right? So one of the signs of inflammation is swelling, and it may not be so obvious, but if you can move that joint back and forth, then those tissues, as you said, kind of flex and extend and shorten and lengthen, and that pumps that abnormal fluid out of there so that the body can process it through its natural systems, the organs and such, and expedite healing, pain control, etc., by getting that bad swelling part of inflammation out of there. Yeah.
And that is also a factor in preventing that pain and stiffness, right? So if you have osteoarthritis in your joints and you move it, and it may be uncomfortable to move it at first, but once you start moving it more and more, you feel a little bit better. So I think that the passive range of motion is good for that, helping with pain, but also with stiffness. And I'll add it in when I'm doing it with patients as a part of my massage. So I'll massage a patient, and as I'm going through their body, I will also take their joints through their range of motion as well, passively. And, and then one of the things I think I see people come in sometimes who have been told to do passive range of motion, and they call it bicycling, right? But I think that you and I talked about this. First of all, when your dog rides a bike, then you can call it bicycling. Okay. Second,
agreed.
Second, it should be done slowly. I think we talked about this already. It really should be done methodically and slowly, taking it through the range of motion. It shouldn't be fast like you're pedaling a bicycle.
Right. Because that's what I think
should be done slowly. Yeah. Yeah. It shouldn't be like you're trying to stay up and like, oh my God, I pedal a bicycle, I'll fall over.
Right.
No, it should be done in a slow manner. And each joint, if you can do each joint individually. So in the front limb, the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder, right?
Yeah. Because too, Kathy, I think that when, like you said, the connotation is bicycling is a fast motion, but also if you are moving all of those joints simultaneously, as you would in riding a bike, then you might miss something. Because, there may be great gross movement, if you will, because the hip and the knee are moving fine, but you don't realize that the ankle is not moving as well. And I use the example with the back leg because that's what I think of, our legs with bicycling, but you potentially, bicycle the front leg too. And again, you might miss that the elbow is stiff.
Right.
In doing that whole limb simultaneously. So, doing a check-in, with each joint individually, as you said, I think is very, very important.
More thorough. Yeah. And I know we touched on this already, but again, it's just being able to have that full range of motion is ideal for function, right? It's so important to function. So we should probably talk about like what it means for the overall health and well-being of your dog to have, or for owners to be able to take their dog's limbs through their range of motion to kind of see what's normal for their dog.
Right. I always use the term a barometer. So if you regularly get your hands on your dog and take the joints through the range of motion, I hope that you would be able to note changes, maybe even very subtle changes over time. Maybe the dog is seeming more uncomfortable because oftentimes a little bit of discomfort or pain reaction can be indicative that something's happening in that joint or in that surrounding tissue.
Right.
And you might, catch very early that they're having a problem and starting to lose some range of motion. And so, get them to the vet. Let's figure it out.
Why is this happening? What's going on?
What can we do about it? Yeah.
Yeah. As therapists, we have the luxury of having the ability to measure those joints, and then we can measure them again later and see and compare and see if there's been any changes. But I think that owners are really good at picking up even subtle changes in their dogs, but very oftentimes before I've even measured, sometimes people will say, this doesn't feel right. This isn't what it was like before. And so again, that's really important because are we having something happening at that joint? Are we having osteoarthritis? Are we having a flare up? Or we have an injury to that joint when the range of motion has changed like that. So that's important for the dog's overall, health.
Right. Absolutely. And when it comes to the front limb, I think that owners may notice that their dog is tripping more when they start to lose some range there, because they have to be able to bend the wrist and the elbow to clear, so whether it's on stairs or stepping over something or simply just walking along, if they're walking very, stiff-legged, subtle change in the terrain, and a little bump in the sidewalk could cause them to trip. So, that's something to kind of look for too. It could be many other things, but maybe they're getting a little stiff or it's uncomfortable. So they're choosing not to bend that body part. And again, that's where we would come in, because maybe it does hurt to bend it when they're up and functioning and weight bearing. But if you have your dog relaxed and they're not bearing weight and you take that joint through the range, maybe it is more comfortable. So again, it's a way to maintain and or restore that full motion that they aren't capable of doing on their own because it hurts.
Yeah. And I think I see this primarily in our dogs that are aging, and maybe they're less active. Maybe they're not going as, on as many walks, or they're kind of reluctant to move because they have some kind of osteoarthritic process happening, at one or multiple joints, right? So taking them through their passive range of motion, please make it feel better, to get it to move like that.
Yeah,
and after surgery too, after surgery of a joint is a perfect time to do that range of motion,
right?
Passive range of motion.
And that's a lot of times where I hear the vets actually prescribing, passive range of motion, not only to us as the rehabbers, but also to the owners. And, as part of the team, we're all in that team together. If the owners can do this as well, 1, 2, 3 times a day at home, again, the progress is going to be exponentiated, and you're going to get, results that much faster versus, 1, 2, 3 times a week, by a professional.
Yeah.
And, I thought of some back limb functions that may really bring to light the importance of range of motion just in general. So imagine if you ask your dog to sit, they always sit before you put their food down or before they get a treat or what have you. If they can't bend their knee to sit, how are they going to do it? So that leg, the leg comes out to the side. Yep. And they keep it more open. They're shifting onto their opposite hip. There's a number of accommodations that can happen. And in the front limb, similarly, if the elbow can't bend, when they lie down, they will lie with their front legs out more toward their head, more extended, so that elbow isn't tucked back under them and bearing that weight when they're lying in a tummy down or sternal position. The other thing is, like with doing activities such as jumping, this may be like a young or athletic dog, and owners may say, gosh, they're in agility and they're hitting the rail and they never did that before. Well, maybe there's a loss of motion somewhere, or, gosh, they missed jumping on the bed, or they missed, jumping into the car. If they can't open up the joints and gather and get that power and extend, especially again, those hips, then they may falter, they may have an accident and cause, an injury. So, I guess we just can't minimize how important, full range is for function.
Yeah. And if you think about it just from as you're talking, I'm thinking about my dog's day. Like, how would his whole day look like if he didn't have full range of motion of his joints? He gets up in the morning and he walks around the house. That would be difficult. He has to go down a flight of stairs. That would be difficult. We go for a walk, sometimes for up and down off the curb that would be difficult. And then coming back in and going up the stairs would make all of that would be very difficult. And then imagine all the compensatory stuff that's happening because our dog has to change his gait and his posture because he can't flex either his wrist or his elbow or his knee. So it's imperative for function, to have good range of motion. Or maximize your range of motion.
those are great examples, bringing it to what we call the ADLs, right? Activities of daily living of your pet.
Yeah.
And as you were saying that, I was even thinking too, like simply getting in and out of their dog bed or on and off their dog bed, or my dogs are constantly up on the couch, and if they couldn't, if you're noticing, geez, my dog's spending a lot more time on the floor. Why is that? It could be a range of motion issue,
Maybe they can't get up there. Yeah. So want to get into the mechanics a little bit, about how you do it in general, the positioning to get owners doing it their own at home.
Yeah. Let's describe the how-tos.
Yeah, the how-tos. I think that, we always talk about the fact that it's important to, have this discussion with your veterinarian before you do these things, right? Before you start doing some of the things that we talk about, massage, range of motion, active range of motion, things like that. Passive range of motion is it is passive. However, there are some circumstances where you may not want to do passive range of motion. And sometimes those things include things like, unstable fractures, or I don't know, I can't even think of that, cancerous processes maybe in those joints, elbows or wrist or shoulder. So check with your vet first, right? Before you start doing it. But once you get the green light, it's actually really easy to do, right? It's very simple.
And I want to tell people too, because again, pet owners might worry, that they're going to hurt their pet because they are not professionals. They've never been, taught how to do this specifically. But your pet, again, will give you an indication.
Oh, yeah.
So you talked about an unstable fracture. If you tried to move, that limb through a range of motion, first of all, they probably wouldn't even let you near it. And secondly, as you move it, it's going to hurt. So they're going to, so we always talk about, Kathy, listening to your pet, right?
Listening to your animal. Right.
And again, that's not to say don't check with your vet. I absolutely agree with that. But I also don't want there to be a fear that you're going to do something that could potentially hurt them, be injurious, because it's one of the most basic and benign things that you can do to help your pet stay healthy and well.
Right. And again, simple. It's a simple thing to do. So let's get down to the how-tos. Okay.
Yeah. So generally you want to, we talked about, go through methodically each joint.
Right.
And I will suggest to people, start at the top or start at the bottom and just kind of work your way up or down, depending on the case.
Let me ask you this. Where do you position yourself when you're doing passive range of motion? Do you like to sit in the front? The dog needs to be laying down to be able to perform the passive range of motion. So they have to be in a lateral position. And that's the first question owners get. They're like, I don't know if I'm more comfortable putting myself in front of the dog or behind the dog when I'm doing it.
I would say for me, I always like to be behind or on the back side of the dog because I feel like I have more control. So just by being in that position, and hopefully your dog is, comfortable, and we'll talk a little bit later about ways to promote that comfort. But yes, you would have to lean over the dog a little bit. So if the dog is sketchy about that, then you might want to be on the other side. But what I mean by control is just being there and reaching kind of across your dog's body tends to keep them in that lying position.
Right.
If I'm down at their toes, then they pop up, right? They can easily kind of get up and the reason we want them lying down, we hadn't really talked about this, but we want them to be as relaxed as possible, to not be engaging those muscles around that joint and creating tension. So we want everything to just be, nice and easy and free moving. So non-weight bearing.
Yep. We don't want we're not engaging the muscles. We're not engaging the muscles in that kind of way. Yep.
But having said that, let's say your dog won't lie down. Every time you approach them when they're lying down, they get suspicious and they want to get up and move away. But if they sit comfortably in front of you and you're working on their front leg, you could potentially pick up one of their front legs while the other one remains on the ground and work on the toes, the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder. Again, not ideal, but better than nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I definitely would say sitting, because then their weight is on their rump and shifted back. So you can manipulate that front limb a little more easily and have them be more relaxed.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I like to position myself behind the animal. So the animal's laying down and I'm just behind. Typically, so for the front leg, I'm just sitting like behind the shoulders, behind the neck, and the dog's in front of me. And again, you have to read the patient. I want them to be relaxed, right? So sometimes I'll start with just a little touching before I start actually going right into the passive range of motion, just to get them relaxed and let them know I'm touching them, but my intention is not to hurt them. And then, Chris, let's talk a little bit about your hand positioning. Do you want to talk about going from the toes up or the shoulder down?
Well, let's go from shoulder down, since we're on the back side of the dog. I will say we have a mutual patient, Mr. Trio. He is long-legged. Yeah. So sometimes I do have to move around, because I can't reach those toes, they're too far away.
I know.
So, if you have a Great Dane or a really, large dog, you may not be able to reach all joints. So of course, make those changes as necessary. So one joint, of the forelimb that we often don't think about is what's called the scapulothoracic joint. Basically, that's the shoulder blade, the scapula, moving on the rib cage. Mm-hmm. And that is imperative for full motion of the front limb. Right. I know in people, I'm not sure you may know this in animals or dogs, Kathy, but in people, the ratio is that for a person to be able to raise their arm above their head, the scapula has to move 1/3, is responsible for 1/3 of that motion by sliding on the rib cage, whereas the ball and socket joint, the shoulder joint next to that, is responsible for 2/3 of that motion. Mm-hmm. So if your shoulder blade was stuck on your ribs for whatever reason, as a person, you'd only be able to get it up 2/3 of the way, right? And
if you're a dog and you're trying to run, you can't get that leg all the way out in front like that. And it should, when you're moving it too, it should glide easily. It should glide nice and smooth. And when you watch dogs playing or running in the park, they're getting that full arm swing right out, right? Especially when you see them get into a gallop too, like it's on, they're moving it. So it should be smooth. It shouldn't be stuck or restricted.
Right. And it's not a true joint in the sense that it's really that shoulder blade is kind of connected, if you will, held onto the body by the muscles. And it should glide equally in all directions. So you probably remember what they called the scapular mobilization.
Well,
it's a mobilization, but you think about like that shoulder blade sitting on the rib cage, and you imagine the face of a clock. And so I'll tell owners, like, for example, when you go up toward the pet's head and you're gliding that shoulder blade up toward the head, that may be 12 o'clock. And when you're moving toward the foot, that's 3 o'clock. When you're moving down the body toward their rear end, that's 6 o'clock. And then back toward you, if you're on the back side of the dog, would be 9 o'clock. But they should be able to hit all those numbers, 1 through 12 equally. And if you note that there is a restriction, it's not gliding as well in one particular direction, then that's the one you want to emphasize a little bit more. You want to gently nudge and hold that shoulder blade in that restricted direction and see if you can't stretch out those tissues. Because remember, again, we said that it's basically what are the soft tissues, and they have the ability, they're elastic, and they have the ability to change over time. And it's such a feel-good exercise.
Right? Yeah. Isn't it? I think I rarely have a dog resist me in this type of movement because it feels good. And sometimes I'll even do a little traction on it. That's what when I have the luxury of being able to do some of these joint mobilizations. But scapula mobilizing or moving or range of motion of the scapula is very simple. And I think what we could do, Chris, is maybe I'll use Mac as a demo. I'll take some pictures of us doing that with Mac. So we can post them so that people can see what the hand position looks like.
Right. And I was going to describe that because basically you want to use both hands, and you're just kind of pushing back and forth between your hands at all those angles and sliding it on the ribs. And one direction that I typically note is the most restricted, especially for older dogs that may have a rear end injury because they've thrown more weight forward. They're putting so much weight through their front limbs and weight bearing that it tends to glide that scapula up, toward their spine or toward the ceiling when they're standing. And so it gets very tight because the body will accommodate to the position that it's given. And it gets very tight then to go the other direction, which is pushing that scapula down towards its foot. So that's one I really tend to assign to owners, is gliding that shoulder blade toward the floor, toward their foot, finding that angle. It's kind of a sharp angle right next to their spine. And you have kind of a flat hand. You use, a broad surface of your hand, and you gently push down. They're lying on their side toward their front toes.
And then from there, we're going to move down from the scapula down to the shoulder.
Or the glenohumeral joint is the technical name. Important to know about the shoulder is that it's a ball and socket. And so it has a lot of potential range in many planes of motion.
Right.
We tend to emphasize forward and backward, right? From the head back toward the belly.
Yeah, and some joints only flex or only have that flexion and extension, but the shoulder is special.
Right. It is special. But for function, it is the front to back that is the most imperative. That is called the primary motion. And then in and out, or ab and adduction, would be secondary.
Right.
And rotation in and out, internal and external rotation, is another secondary motion. So I think that maybe the hip and the shoulder are fairly equal in terms of both being a ball and socket joint and having the most range of all joints in the body. Right.
And Chris, can you just sort of let the audience know we just talked for a second about how some limbs will flex and extend, and some joints just flex and extend, but the shoulder and the hip are a little bit different because they're a ball and socket. But can you explain that ball and socket? Why is it important for it to move in those directions? Like what position are dogs getting themselves in that they need that rotation or abduction or internal rotation or external rotation?
Well, I think there's a lot of just normal activities that require those secondary motions. One would be turning a corner. Okay. So the limbs have to, kind of be in and out and rotating as they're walking in a curved line, going around a corner. The other would just be simple things like getting up and down from the floor. If they're lying on their side, they have to get those limbs under them. And how do they do that? They have to, rotate and move in and out. It's not just a straight forward and backward motion. So.
All right. Well, do you want to talk to the audience about what your hand placement would look like for doing some of these motions with the shoulder?
Sure. So as we move down the limb, generally you want to think about stabilizing or holding relatively still the segment that is above, meaning more toward the body. Technical term is called proximal segment of that joint, and then moving the segment that is distal or farther away from the body. So in this example, you might have your hand resting on the dog's shoulder blade area, okay, that shoulder girdle, and then that first segment below that shoulder girdle is the humerus, and you would move that segment forward and backward while relatively stabilizing the shoulder blade area. So does that make sense, Kathy?
It does. Yeah. And then I'm going to move down to you're going to do a similar thing with the elbow, because we want to go above and below the joint. So we're just going to have our hand placement above the elbow. Right. And just below the elbow. Right. And I think I will put up some pictures too, because sometimes clients, ask me to identify where is the shoulder, where is the elbow, where is the wrist, and sometimes they'll mislabel it. Like they're like, oh, it's their front knee, but it's not their front knee; it's their elbow. So
and I think that's important to reiterate at this point is that their front legs are like our arms. Right. And their back legs are like our legs. Yeah. So the joint anatomy has the same terminology. Yeah. So one of the things that is then unique about the elbow, it's a very complex joint. So you have, again, that upper limb segment, the humerus, it's a big, thick bone, relatively short, but then you have two forearm bones that come up and meet that humerus at the elbow joint. And it's a very, what we call congruous joint. There is not a lot of motion there, or shouldn't be, except for front to back, bending and straightening. So if you notice that your dog has a lot of angulation in or out, or rotation or torsion at that elbow joint, that's not necessarily normal. It may be something that can be addressed, or it could be conformational. But generally the movement is front to back, bending and straightening.
Yeah.
And when you straighten it, and let's go back, actually, let's regress back to the glenohumeral or shoulder joint. Generally, what I tell folks is that normal extension or straightening of that shoulder, you can get that forelimb pretty close to your dog's nose without much effort.
Right.
And again, every dog is different, so you need to get that baseline. And then when you go back, allow the limb to bend, but that elbow should come up just right alongside their ribs. Not excessive, not way back up over their spine, but, just, kind of parallel to the ribs. So you're going forward and backward. When it comes to the elbow joint, the elbow straightens almost fully. Normal is about 165 degrees. If you think 180 is completely straight. So it's almost straight. And then bending, it bends to about maybe 35, 40 degrees. So a very acute angle. And you also want to compare sides, because again, you're trying to learn your dog's normal, but if it's bending way up, let's say to 20 degrees on one side, and then the other side is stopping at 70 degrees, there's a pretty big disparity there. So that's something that needs to be noted. Why is that? Which one is normal? And
if we go back again to talking about our dog's daily lives, right? How important the elbow is so important. Traversing different terrains, ups and downs, in and out of the car, up and down stairs, up and down off the furniture. And you're right; it's a very complicated joint. Probably out of all the joints, I would say probably the most complicated. Of the joints,
and the most likely to lose range of motion in a way, but certainly if that range of motion is lost, it's the most difficult joint to restore range of motion. Hands down for people. For people. Very difficult to get range of motion back. So a friend of mine who's in agility, her dog recently had a very complicated elbow surgery. And, I was talking to her, I'm like, we got to work on that, getting that motion restored, because it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Right. So let's move on down to the wrist, or what would be called the carpus, but typically, if you're looking at it as from a human perspective, you would call it the wrist.
Lots of little bones there.
So many little bones. They're so cute, and there's so many. Right? But again, super important for range of motion. And I see some dogs in therapy that have hyperextension of their wrist or osteoarthritis of the wrist. And it makes it difficult for stepping over things. It makes it very difficult for stepping up and down off the curbs, up and down over things if you're on a walk. And same thing with the toes. But I'll let you talk about the wrist first before I tell you my toe story.
Well, when you're talking about the wrist, I remembered our conversation that we had with the folks at OrthoPets. And do you remember when Martin said that on the East Coast, one of the largest injuries for which people were seeking braces was for that carpal hyperextension.
What are we doing on the East Coast that's
I don't know.
These carpal hyperextensions?
But I think that a lot of times that is caused by jumping down or off things, out of the car. Right. We have a lot of stairs here. It's a very hilly terrain. And so, all that pounding and impact, can certainly cause that issue. And again, hard to diagnose. Sometimes they need like a stress x-ray or whatever. But if you got your hands on your dog regularly and you notice, wow, because the wrist should go a little bit farther back, a little bit straighter than just straight. Okay. So it hyperextends just slightly. Yeah. That's normal. Yeah. But if it, again, one side goes way back and the other side doesn't, could be an issue. It should bend almost to the point where the toes touch the forelimb. Okay, that's somewhat normal. Not quite, some dogs may get their toes to their forelimb. Other dogs, it may not quite be there, but it bends quite a bit. And then there's also a little bit of motion side to side, which we call Varus and Valgus.
Mm-hmm.
So when the paw, if you will, at the wrist turns out as if they are kind of duck-footed, then that is a valgus position. And if it turns in so that they're pigeon-toed, if you will, I don't know why I'm using all these bird analogies.
We call the valgus, we call it easty-westy. One's pointing to the east, one's pointing to the west.
Well, there you go. But again, that can be part of a normal conformation or what have you. But if one moves a lot farther in either direction, and that movement is very minimal. So the wrist joint primarily moves up and down, bending and straightening, forward and backward, not a lot of side to side or rotation.
Yeah. And you know what, and then again, for our passive range of motion, we're going to do the same kind of positioning for this joint as we did for the elbow and the shoulder. We're going to go just above and just below. We're going to slowly flex and extend, Right.
So you're holding that segment, the forearm, if you will, relatively stable, and bending that lower segment, the foot, up and down.
And oftentimes I think that people forget about the feet and the toes when it comes to like the range of motion of the toes. And when we talked about this, you and I talked about this on another episode about how animals are digigrade animals, and they stand weight bearing on their toes. The toes are really an important asset, and they should move smoothly, right? And I had a patient not that long ago who was a young dog, and she was young then, but she was going to be trained to be a herding dog, or she was herding or hunting. I can't remember. And she fractured one of her middle weight bearing toes. And the vets were like, we'll splinter for a couple of weeks. She'll be fine. And I was like, no, we need to, when she gets out of that splint, we need to mobilize that toe and do some exercises to keep that toe mobile. Because can you imagine if she's going to be a sporting dog, she's going to get arthritis in that toe. She may not have full range of motion in that toe. And that's going to limit her in her mobility.
Weight shift off of that because it's not moving.
Weight shifts off of it because of a toe. So I think that, maybe they're like, it's just a toe. But I was like, what?
Right.
It's not just a toe. It's
a toe that you're bearing weight on.
It's a toe that you're bearing weight on. So it's really important, to think about them as such. That's your dog's greatest asset is their foot. And those toes need to be mobile. They need to be pliable and mobile. Right?
Yep. And you mentioned, going in the splint and then advocating for doing range of motion and restoring that range of motion after. That's one thing we haven't mentioned yet. We said after surgery because that's very traumatic surgery, even though it's a good thing ultimately. The process is traumatic and you have inflammation and range of motion is lost. But also, even without surgery, if joint is immobilized via a splint or a cast, it doesn't take long and they start to lose range of motion in whatever is, because that's the whole point, right? You're keeping it still. But as I mentioned before, the body accommodates quickly to the amount of motion that it's given. So you lose motion and it's hard to get back once it's lost.
Have you ever had your arm or leg in a cast and see what it looks like when it comes out?
I have not.
It's like it's lost all its muscle.
But I have not personally.
It's lost all its muscle. It's skinny, and you're stiff, and you're if you had it up to your wrist or your elbow, moving it is like it's hard to move after that, after being immobilized like that. So it's so important to get it, especially if you've been immobilized for a period of time, to get that range of motion back.
And an immobilization can take many forms. So when you talk about stiffness, I think about if I've laid in one position in bed.
Yeah.
Like I'm like so tired and I realize I wake up in the same position that I hit the mattress in. Yeah. And oh my gosh, am I stiff? Especially the older that I'm getting. And that same thing happens with our pets. Yeah. So if they, and especially if you're in an awkward position, right? Like remember when you wake up and your head's all cockamamie and your neck is like killing you, that's a problem. And what do we need to do? We need to like slowly move and restore that motion. And then we feel better. And if our if our pet isn't capable of doing that on their own because they're older, they're not that active, we need to act as their surrogates. We need to promote that motion. Yep. And passive range of motion is a very gentle way to do that.
Right. And again, I just realized how excited I get about the dog's foot, because I'm so involved with the dog's foot, with the traction and the mobility and the toes and the nail trims. But I wonder if it really shouldn't be overlooked.
Well, I was going to say, I wonder if our avid listeners are sick of us talking about feet.
I love
it. Every show.
I know every show is about the foot and
foot traction,
but it's all about, it is all about the foot, especially if you're a digitigrade animal and you're walking on your toes, right? Mm. So I'm sorry that I keep bringing everything back to the foot, but the foot shouldn't be overlooked. Sometimes in therapy, we'll go through the range of motion of the shoulder, the scapula, the elbow, and the wrist, and we stop there. But we shouldn't. You got to go all the way down. Mm-hmm. You got to go all the way down to the toes.
Right. And there are eight little bones in the wrist,
right?
But so many more bones in the foot. I think
in the foot.
I'm going to make up something. I think 27 bones or something total.
Bones. I know.
Yeah.
And it's holding a lot of animal. It's holding a lot of animal.
Right.
So how do you do your range of motion on the toes, Chris? What's your technique?
Well, sometimes I just gently kind of pull them out, because gentle traction of the digit will promote more range. So that's a general principle. And again, I just kind of bend and straighten, but keep in mind that the toes are made up of 3 little bones. So, you want to make sure that you're moving at all of those articulations, and the toes do move in and out and rotate, as we've mentioned with other joints. So I will put my fingers in between each digit and, kind of spread them apart very gently, bend up and down, maybe twist them a little bit. But again, primary motion is up and down or front to back.
Do you ever do this, Chris, where you just put the paw on your hand and just have that kind of stretch the toes on your hand? Does that make sense? I know, because our audience can't see us, but.
Yeah. Where your hand is basically acting as the floor would be if they were standing up.
Yeah.
And I think of that more as a stretch, because I'll tend to hold that if they can tolerate it. But again, if they've not been bearing weight fully because it hurts or they've had surgery or what have you, the toes will tend to curl a little bit, and they'll be in a more flexed position. To fully weight bear comfortably, those toes need to extend. So again, watch your dog, look at them when they're napping, for example, and look at their foot, and their toes are kind of down slightly. And then when they stand up, those toes are really extended the opposite way. So imagine if you didn't have that full range of motion, all 4 of those toes, how that again would affect things.
Yeah.
I mentioned in another episode, and I always think of this when we talk about the feet, there was a very famous continuing education course in the human world, and it was called When the Feet Hit the Ground, Everything Changes. So if something is not right with that foot hitting the ground, impacting, standing, walking, it can affect things all the way in the people world, all the way up through the neck, and, in the dog world, certainly up through, their shoulder girdle and pelvic girdle. So
starts there.
Fine.
As soon as that makes contact with the ground, as soon as that foot makes contact with the ground. So now that we've talked a little bit about how to do it, I think we should talk a little bit about how do we get them to buy in on the passive range of motion?
This is your jam, Kathy.
How do we get them to buy in on it, right?
Yeah. Fear-free, the fear-free movement. We've talked a lot about that.
The fear-free movement.
Various shows. Yep.
And we had an episode not that long ago with a groomer, Megan Terwilliger, and she said something I just love. She said, I don't want to do something to a dog. I want them to participate in this conversation, right? So I agree. I want the dog not maybe just let me do it, but maybe have it as be a bonding experience as well, an enjoyable experience, and certainly a fear-free experience, right? So I typically wait for my dog when I do stuff like this. I typically wait until he's quiet. So at nighttime, so around 6 o'clock, he's on the couch. We'll start with our massages. We'll start with the sweet talking, a little sweet talking, and then move into the range of motion, right?
Right.
And sometimes if he resists, I'll let him move until he's comfortable again before I start. I don't want to chase him around,
right?
Because I don't want him to go, oh God, every time I lay down here, she's doing this and she's doing that, right? And I don't want to be a part of that. So I kind of listen to him, about what he's saying. Maybe I'll do one side and maybe I'll do the other side later.
Right. I think sometimes you mentioned bonding. If the pet gets special time, maybe away from other pets in the household or people, away from the kids, and you go to, bedroom, you close the door, you turn down the lights. They know that, nobody's going to step on them. They're, it's quiet, it's calm. And that is such a special time, for you and your pet. So, certainly, capturing those moments when they are calm and you're, watching television, but sometimes it's worth actually going to a special place that they know the signal is, oh, when we go into this room, this is my time with my mom and she loves me.
We do this thing.
And I get treats and it feels good. And it doesn't take, a long time to do this. I mean, what would you say, Kathy, to go through, maybe 5-10 minutes a limb, including massage. Yeah.
Not long. You know what? And when I'm doing a treatment with Mac, I actually keep our treats to a minimum because it gets him more excited. So treats are pretty specific, like to flipping over, like from one side to the other, or I'll use it at the end, like to just signal, okay, we're all done. This is
as a reward.
As a reward.
Yeah. Good behavior. You were nice and calm. Now you get your treat.
Yeah, I'm going to turn you on to something that you're really going to like. I have a CD called Through a Dog's Ears. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's, I believe the guy's name is Josh. Oh, I'd have to look it up. Josh Leeds. And it is music that has been, it's sort of compiled specifically for dogs, right? So what they found during studies is that dogs like certain sounds. So maybe the harp or maybe the piano, and it's all set to be calming for the animal. So you've set the stage, right? You've set the stage. You've got something that might be enjoyable from auditory, right? You've got a nice music that is calming for them. Maybe you even dim the lights so there's not a lot of visual stimulation. You've separated them from the other dogs, so there's no worry about whether a dog's going to come and interrupt your session. So you're setting the stage, and you have to change your own mindset. So you have to be prepared for it as well. So when you go in and you're like, okay, and you're like me, like, oh, I got to treat my dog.
Yeah.
They know
frazzled.
They know that, right? Whose dog doesn't know that you're upset? Everybody's dogs know.
I don't have time for this. Come on, hurry up, lay down.
Exactly. And they know it, right? So you have to have your own mindset. So all those things are nice for you as well. Sort of, getting that light turned down and getting some of that, audio of the piano or the whatever you like, the harp. I'm a big fan of this CD. It's such a nice, it really is quite, I actually enjoy it myself. But there have been studies done on these types of music and how it affects a dog's behavior. So you can add that into your routine of massaging and stretching and,
and I think too, having them on a comfortable surface. So, you might think, oh, I'll put them in their bed. But if the bed is very billowy, sometimes that makes it hard. They kind of sink difficult, I should say, not hard, difficult to perform the passive range of motion because they sink down into it. It may be constraining to your passive movement of the limb. And you also have to think about your own body mechanics. So, oftentimes as a therapist, I'm on the floor with the dog, no matter their size. If they're small, certainly you can bring them up onto some furniture. A lot of owners will do it on their bed, that sort of thing. But, make sure that you are positioned so that you are comfortable because you're going to be there for a little bit of time too. And, watch your own, back and reaching and, and posture, so that you can do this over time. One of the things we didn't mention is warming up and making sure that the dog is also warmed up. So you don't want to do range of motion, in a cold environment. You want to, have them be literally warm. So, maybe even applying a microwavable heat pack to the area, or we've mentioned massage throughout the podcast, and massage is a way to warm them up, or coming in after some exercise. So, they've gotten blood flowing to all the muscles and the joints have been loosened through active range of motion, through their walk, for example.
Yeah.
And then, they're also a little bit, more chill and tired, because those endorphins have been stimulated, and then they're more willing to maybe lay down and rest after their walk or exercise versus before.
And maybe you could even use some of those warm-up exercises that we talked about in our episode of warm-ups. Maybe we could use some of those first and then go into the passive range of motion. The other thing that, as you were talking, I thought of, when I do large dogs, some of the things I don't remember is that I need to give myself enough space for the dogs to get their full extension, right? So if my pug, it doesn't take up much room, but I had a Great Dane. Actually, Chris knows what I'm talking about because I just helped me with him the other day. When he lays down, if we're up against the wall, I can't get his full range out because he's too long, right? So make sure you have enough amount of space to get those limbs fully out, front and back. Because if you get yourself in a small space with a Great Dane, you're not going to be able to get the leg all the way out.
Right. And you talked about kind of capturing where Mac is, but, oftentimes I will use the treat to have them, sit and then lie down and be smart about that. Do it in the middle of the room so that you can navigate all around them as well, because you may have to, if they're long-legged or large dog, move to the other side and, make sure that you have room to be on all sides and move around, let alone that the pet has room to move fully. So, yep. I think these are all great ideas. I think it's not going to be difficult. I think it's not going to be difficult to get your dog to have buy-in because it's special time. I think it's going to be, I think it's not going to be difficult to get the dog to buy in. And, I have a couple of patients who are cats. Oh, yeah. We don't want to forget our cat friends, because our cat friends also need to have that same type of mobility. They need to have their full functioning range of motion of their joints. Sometimes it's a little harder to get the cats to sit still for that. But when the same thing we said before, if you can get them in a place where they're not distracted, they're comfortable, maybe they've had their bedtime snack and they've been walking around and now they're on your bed. Well, maybe now is the time to sort of see if we can get in that range of motion with your cats as well. Oh, yeah. I've done range of motion with many a cat. And, again, you just chill, gentle, and kind of sneak up on them and start with some petting. And then before you know it, you're bending their limb. And, again, it's rehab 101. Yeah. I watched Animal Planet fervently. And, even these shows, like the zoo and so forth, they may have to immobilize, for an injury, a stork's leg, or, they've done surgery on a wombat or something like that. Yeah. And, so the first thing that they're doing when they're restoring their function and getting them back, into population is making sure that they have range of motion, again, I cannot emphasize how beneficial it is for every being. Movement really is essential. It really is. And it really is. And it's not just about, when you think about it, when these little puppies are born, they can't see and they can't hear, but instinctually the first thing they do is move. And they move to get the best place to suckle. So it's imperative to survival that they're able to move. And as they grow, having this movement equals independence, freedom. Like you said, in a prey animal too, when you said survival, I'm thinking, gosh, if that rabbit can't move, or the giraffe that's just born on the, she's got to get up in like 20 minutes. She's got to get up in 20 minutes to start moving. So it's important for all the aspects of life and for all creatures that have movement to be able to move. Yeah. So I think the take home message is that that movement is good, and sometimes we just need to help our furry, scaled, and feathered loved ones out. Right. Yeah. And so that they have the best movement possible. That's right. For their best life possible. So, all right. Thank you, Chris. It was good to see you. Stay tuned. Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our show. Follow us on Facebook or on Instagram at PetAbility Podcast.
For more information about Kathy's books and living with blind dogs, please go to enableyourpet.com. Thank you, and please tune in next time.